into the inaugural episode of the Royal Cougars Podcast, and joining me is the perfect guest for this episode. The first person that I would want to have on this podcast is the one and only Mitch Harper, because one, Mitch is awesome. Two, he's the big brother I never had. And three, he knows everything about BYU sports. I listened to his Phil Still interview the other day. You should go back and listen to it. The man has 31 years worth of these magazines, and like, what kind of kid keeps magazines like that? Mitch keeps those magazines. He likes to have, the encyclopedias to go back to, and I couldn't think of a better person to talk fall camp and the upcoming season with than you, Mitch. Welcome to the Royal Cougars Podcast. Thanks for joining me, man.
Kyle, honored to be on the inaugural episode of Royal Cougars. And yes, I am a weirdo that as a 7-year-old would maintain the magazine and not rip it up and draw on it and keep it pristine, to where as a 37-year-old, I still have that magazine, and I'm pretty proud of that. But I'm happy to be on here and talk BYU sports with you. So excited, Kyle. Congrats on this new podcast, and excited to be on the first episode.
Well, thank you, Mitch. I really do appreciate that. And it's been exciting. This fall camp's been, similar to past fall camps in some ways, and also different because, new players, those types of things, and, different storylines. But, Kalani brings back his staff. You've got, the offseason, quarterback story and turnover. And so that's kind of where I wanted to get started, is obviously, with that headline story with the quarterbacks. So you've got McKay Hillstead, you've got Bear Bachmeier coming in after he transfers following spring ball out of Stanford. And it's kind of crazy, Mitch. I mean, you think back to where BYU was even 6 months ago, like it's a completely different scenario, right? And you're coming off an 11-win season. You think you're going to have your senior quarterback coming back, and, things are going to be just smooth sailing going into, this 2025 season. But now you're sitting here as, Aaron Roderick and Kalani Sitake are, and they're looking at, these two young quarterbacks, one who hasn't ever seen a snap in college football, and another one who's seen it at the G5 level at Utah State with McKay Hillstead. How do you think the staff is looking at this quarterback battle between Bear, a really talented freshman, came in with a lot of accolades out of high school, and, probably has a higher ceiling than McKay does. But McKay, we saw flashes of, some really good play with him at Utah State. He also played, locally here at Skyridge High, and he was an electric player in high school. And I thought, it was interesting that BYU didn't recruit him as heavily out of high school. And, he ends up kind of finding his way back after the turnover there up in Logan. But how do you think they're viewing this quarterback battle a couple weeks into camp, and now that it's down to those two guys?
They're confident that they will get some answers and have success with either one of these quarterbacks. And Aaron Roderick and Kalani Sitake are very optimistic that both these quarterbacks will be okay and that BYU will be fine because they have a history of navigating quarterback battles and really turning them into successful situations. The best Kalani Sitake teams, since he became the head coach in 2016, his 10th year coming up this fall, they've started with quarterback battles. 2016, 2018, not as great of a year. That was 7-6, but 16, 2020, 2021, and 2024. Those are Kalani's 4 best seasons. And the common thread with all those, they started with quarterback battles. And so this coaching staff comes in with confidence, feeling like we can do it again. And, they've got a guy in Bear Bachmeier who, since Aaron Roderick became the offensive coordinator, the highest rated quarterback that BYU has signed with the program, has joined the program. Obviously, Ryder Lyons is down the road, but, Bears, at the time when he committed, that was the highest rated player that Aaron Roderick and this staff have signed. So they're very confident, and they're optimistic that, these guys can be successful. But I will say, Kyle, that in these observation periods during camp, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. It hasn't always just been a flawless execution. It's been up and down. It hasn't always been pristine, but you do see moments, I think, from Bear and McKay that give you hope that this BYU team with the first team offensive line in front of them and some of the personnel that's around them could be really good this year. And as there's been reports out there, it's trending towards Bear Bachmeier, and even Aaron Roderick hinted at that publicly, saying he's taking a majority of the first team reps. And then in the Cougar Club practice at LES, he took all the first team snaps in what was about a 25-play practice in front of fans at LES. So Bear Bachmeier and McKay Hillstead, I don't want to say you can't go wrong, because I think, maybe they both could go wrong, but I think someone's going to hit and be really successful for BYU this year.
And obviously, what you've seen as far as like media portions of practice, they're limited, and, you may see one guy get team reps with the first team and, another guy who's, with the second team, or you don't see as much with the first team that day. It is funny how, they do kind of try to keep those things under wraps, even with the access that's given, but it does sound.
I will say, Kyle, that during the media windows that we have had, it's been pretty impactful stuff, because when you're dealing with three quarterbacks at the beginning of camp, all of them were kind of data points in, like you can look into their play and really analyze every snap. Now, when you get to Emerson Geilman, the four-string guy from Bountiful High School, who I will say has been kind of an underrated guy, but always with the four-string offense. I think he's got a bright future ahead, plans to serve a mission after this year, but, joined as a PWO. But I think every snap has kind of taken on significance. It's had a little bit of pressure on each snap. And I think that's been kind of rewarding, where it hasn't just been, players are standing around, spinning around, looking, doing nothing, and we're just like twiddling our thumbs. Like, no, it's been some good 11-on-11 work. There's been a few days where we get even like 25, 28 minutes. Not bad. I mean, look, I'd love to watch all of practice, but we're getting some good sample sizes of these QBs, and maybe you got to stretch it a little bit with a few highlight plays, and then you're projecting that over the course of 12 games. But still, we're seeing some, impactful moments where it's, these plays are what you would typically see from Aaron Roderick offenses. Like sometimes you're just seeing a lot of check downs, but they're taking shots downfield. You're seeing those jet sweeps, like the signature plays of Aaron Roderick offenses. And so I think there's a pretty good, I want to say complete feel of this quarterback unit, but it's been impactful. I think these observation windows that we have had.
With that said, I mean, if we were to zone in on Bear for a moment, you've got a guy who's, seen some action in spring ball and, now fall camp with BYU, but he's never seen live reps, live action, the other guys coming at him. And he's going to see that if he's the starting quarterback on August 30th or, later on in the season, if that's the case. But what is it that makes it so that Aaron Roderick and Kalani Sitake look at a guy who hasn't seen those live bullets, so to speak, but has learned the playbook like they've said, and he's caught up on the offense and all of those things? What is it about his talent, his ceiling, the things that made him a 4-star recruit that say, oh, like we can trust that guy going into game number 1 against the Vikings?
He doesn't get sped up. He's looked really calm. He's really looked poised in all of his opportunities. He's had interceptions and turnovers and made mistakes, as you would expect from a true freshman. And look, that's just what it is with true freshman quarterbacks. They're going to be up and down seasons more times than not. But he has been, he looks more mature than he is. That his age would suggest is what a better way to put it. And he just has really been very calm and collected in that pocket. Does he know every ounce of that playbook? It seems hard to imagine that truly is the case. But, he's been put in a position to be on equal footing from the moment he arrived on campus with McKay Hillstead and Trayson Bourget. And I asked Aaron Roderick, I believe it was day 3 of camp, like, what did you see in summer from Bear that said this true freshman from the jump warrants being on equal footing with two guys that you've been working with for more than a year? And he pointed, Aaron Roderick did, to the accolades in high school, the high-profile nature of his recruitment. And sometimes you wonder, is that a case of location, him being in California? It sounds a little bit more glamorous being a hotshot California quarterback compared to a Utah County, quarterback that's a little bit undersized. But still, Bear has looked the part. He's got good mechanics. There's going to be some areas in decision making where you got to tighten it up. But there's also a little bit of a pedigree too in his family. The Bachmeiers, like his older brother Hank, did this same thing. And his first start as a college football player was at Boise State in 2019. It was Florida State on the road. It's supposed to be a neutral site game. He ends up going to Tallahassee, and he went off for like 300 plus yards and won that game as a freshman. So that family, they're thrusted into the spotlight. They're very familiar with that sort of deal. And Bachmeier has, I think done a really nice job thus far. But there's still that feeling of, what can you realistically expect with a true freshman? Can he honestly get them to Arlington in a Big 12 where you've got loaded quarterback play? I mean, this league probably goes 10 deep. And BYU's quarterback unit, it's underrated. I don't know if Cougar fans really realize this, but I'd put him into the bottom 4 of the Big 12 in quarterback units right now. Maybe at season's end that could change, but I mean, you just go through the list. Rocco Beck, Sawyer Robertson, Josh Hoover, on and on. So, this is a light quarterback unit with the departure of Jake Retzloff now to Tulane, but this coaching staff's optimistic about their potential, and Bear Bachmeier has seized his opportunities when given to him to really be on equal footing with McKay, and he's taken the most of his opportunities, and that's where it feels like, he's the guy that's trending to being that QB1.
I know you're a draft junkie like I am, NFL draft, NBA draft, all those things. And when you talk about those, prospects and those types of events and, going to the next level, there's always like the player comp, who does this guy remind you of? As you've looked at Bear, is there a BYU quarterback of the last, 10 years or whenever? I won't limit you there, but is there somebody that you're like, oh, he reminds me of that player? And then kind of to piggyback off that, does this quarterback battle, this situation, remind you of any quarterback situations in the past, or is it just those years that you mentioned before, just with the similarities there?
Reminds me a little bit of Taysom Hill, where Taysom Hill, remember, he came into BYU and maybe a little bit more athlete than quarterback. I think Bear's a more farther ahead quarterback than Taysom was when he arrived, but very physical runner. I think McKay Hillstead's the best overall athlete as far as running the football goes in this quarterback unit. He's got elite speed. McKay is fast. And sometimes you don't see that in a practice setting too, when you're not going to get hit. I think that guy's got great top end speed. He had a great run in spring ball, when the context was battling for the backup job, and he just takes off. It was like a 40-yard run down the sideline. It looked great. And, but Bear, I think, is the type of quarterback that he's not going to be afraid of contact, but at the same time, that's, a little bit worrisome because, like, is he going to be able to withstand the hits in college football and be able to do that? So he's got to be smart, but I think that he is a really good athlete, and he's got the ability to throw the football deep. But a little bit reminds me of Taysom. So I think, young Taysom as far as the ability to take off and run and take on defenders, but then the combination of Taysom evolving as a passer. Because remember, in Taysom, that Nebraska game in 2015 or even in 2016, when BYU would actually go a little bit more up-tempo when Ty Detmer is the offensive coordinator, Taysom was brilliant, and he's still in the NFL, for goodness sake. So I think I kind of point to that as far as a BYU quarterback goes. I think as far as what this quarterback battle reminds me of, I think it's, a little bit of where, you see some similarities a little bit with maybe, last year with Jake Retzloff and Gary Bohannon, in the sense of, Aaron Roderick really identified someone early before a lot of people did. Whereas, Jake Retzloff, Aaron Roderick was in the mix for a while. It was after Troy and all those programs, but, BYU was kind of the only power conference really going after, or conference team going after Jake Retzloff. Aaron Roderick saw something. It was kind of his guy. And similar sense of Bear Bachmeier was someone that he believed in early on in the recruiting process for the 2025 cycle. Bear was a guy that attended camp as a 10th grader, and BYU really liked him and wanted him. He was near the top of their big board for 2025 prospects. And So in that sense, like just a long-standing history of belief in that guy. And whereas Gary Bohannon, McKay Hillstead, maybe not this long body of work of belief, I think maybe more so on the end of Bohannon, where BYU recruited him in another transfer portal cycle. He ends up going to USF, but still, McKay Hillstead was dabbled a little bit with recruiting with BYU, but it wasn't that intense to where he ends up at Utah State, and then BYU gets into the mix in the transfer portal time when he leaves for Utah State. So I think every quarterback battle takes a life of its own, but I think this staff just feels confident, circling back to that they've done it all. They've kind of seen it all. This is a new wrinkle where you got the whole position outlook changed at Memorial Day pretty much, even though it wasn't official with Jake until July officially. But they everyone saw the writing on the wall potentially. And so you have your whole outlook change. And so that's a different wrinkle compared to others. But, I think they feel pretty confident that they can get the most out of these guys to put out a successful team this season.
So you've got, weapons like Chase Roberts. You've got LJ Martin, a year older, changed his body a little bit, it sounds like. And then, you've got Carson Ryan at tight end now, who's shown some flashes in camp and, had some pretty high accolades as well, coming out of high school. And I look at those guys around Bear, if he's the starter, does it change the offense at all, just the fact that he is a true freshman? Or does A-Rod say, hey, like, you're the guy, you earned it, and you've got these weapons around you, go out there and utilize them, and, it's going to be the BYU offense that we've seen in recent years?
If you want to make another comparison, maybe it's a little bit like Max Hall in 2007. Remember Max Hall in 2007 against Arizona? They only won, I think, 20-6. They leaned heavily on Harvey Unga running the football. That was kind of the breakout game for Harvey. He was having a great fall camp that year, and then he really took off in that game. I expect similar, where BYU is going to run the football. I think Aaron Roderick's content winning a game, maybe not against Portland State, but against FBS competition, like winning it 24-3. If you get in, get out, stay healthy, quick, efficient football game that's 2 hours and 45 minutes, by all means, kill that clock and just run the football. I think BYU would be okay with that. Maybe it's a little bit too like 2016, again with Taysom Hill, Kalani's first year. That was a season where it felt like if Jamal Williams, the swag daddy, gets 25 carries or more, BYU is going to win. And I expect a huge workload for LJ Martin, where if he's getting less than 20 touches in a game, that's not going to be a recipe for success. The problem there is LJ Martin's got a history of getting injured. I'm sure he's sick and tired of hearing about, he's got this injury history, but it is what it is. Like, that's just what it's been. Texas game in Austin on the 40 acres in 2023, late scratch, LJ Martin. And, 2024, it's shoulder. And then it's week 2 against SMU where he's finally getting into a groove. And then, bang, injured ankle. And he was out for an extended period of time. So he's got to stay healthy. I think Sione Moa is going to be really good as a sophomore for BYU. Very excited about him. But LJ's got to be a superstar for BYU to be a team if they can get to Arlington. He's got to be one of the best running backs in the Big 12. I think he's got that potential. But that's what it is right now. It's just potential. And he's got to realize that every single week. He's been the leading rusher the past 2 years. But it still feels like, there's so much more to be had from LJ Martin. Like, he's still scratching the surface of what he can become. So I think LJ is going to be getting a huge workload, and that helps Bear to kind of ease him in. And then you pick your spots to take your shots downfield and go to Chase Roberts, go to Tiger Bachmeier, go to Cody Hagan, who I think is having a really good fall camp. He's going to be a special player for BYU. Parker Kingston, JoJo Phillips, I think is ready to take a leap and be that wide receiver too for BYU. So there's options, but you got to lean heavily on LJ Martin. He's going to be the bell cow for BYU this year.
Switching sides of the ball there, you've got Jay Hill, a few years into the system or into the program now with his system, and you saw how good that defense was a year ago. Has there been an emphasis on anything unique or different this year that you've noticed with some of the guys like, Tanavasa coming in, losing a guy like Batty last year? I mean, there's just some change in, the natural turnover season to season. Is there anything different that you've noticed as far as the defense is concerned?
more speed. And I'd also say that they're just going to be really versatile, where they could be a multiple defense, even odd fronts, whatever it ends up being. You probably think it's going to be more an odd front with still the status of Justin Kirkland kind of up in the air. He's still dealing with a knee, Oklahoma State transfer, huge guy in the interior to pair up with Keanu when he's healthy. He's not healthy right now, and he hasn't been practicing yet. Maybe you go to more of that odd front with three guys up there with Keanu Tanavasa and two defensive ends and maybe add a linebacker. But, this group is going to be really good. I think this is going to be the best defense since 2012. Kalani Sitake teams have been, better defenses than people give them credit for, because I think before Jay Hill, everyone just assumes, well, it was just a train wreck. It was always a mess. No one liked Tuiaki. No one liked the defense. But really, when you dig into the numbers, there were a lot of top 50 defenses in those early years with Kalani. And then it just really bottomed out in 2022. And it was a missed opportunity because you had a great quarterback in Jaron Hall, which is a shame because that offense could put up numbers. You just didn't have the defense there. I think this year, with a little bit of questions on the offensive side, particularly at quarterback, this defense can win a rock fight again. And you saw that last year. Could they be the number one defense in the Big 12? They've got the talent. They got the personnel to do that, Kyle. But, you got to have also complementary football where the offense isn't just quickly going 3 and out all the time. You don't want to get them worn down. You got to stay healthy, too. I mean, last year, it was a team that stayed pretty healthy for the most part. And it was amazing how balanced the defense was. The leading tackler was Isaiah Glasgow, and he only ended up with I think it was 71 tackles. Lowest total tackles in a season by a leader. It's like the early 90s. It was kind of strange how balanced it was across the board for BYU on the tackle front. But this will be a good defense. They've got a lot of speed in the secondary, particularly at cornerback. Jarnell Guilford told me this is the fastest cornerback unit he's had since he joined the staff with Kalani Sitake since year 1 in 2016. This is year 10 for Coach G, who took on an elevated role this year on the staff. Kind of the same thing that he was doing last season, but pass game defense coordinator for Jay Hill. Heightened role. I think more impactful than people realize because Coach G, but he's got a talented secondary and the safeties are going to be good too. So I'm really excited about this defense. And we have seen signs with Keanu Tanavasa in the middle where he is terrorizing this offensive line. There was a day in camp in week 2 where Tanavasa, Jack Kelly, some of even the backup defensive linemen were just eating up the offensive line, the interior in particular. And, on the flip side, you're like, is the offensive line going to be good? But no, these guys were just putting in work, and Keanu Tanavasa was brilliant. And someone like a Tausili Akana, I think, is going to be really good too. I think he could be big time for BYU, one of the best pass rushers, I think, in the Kalani era. So there's a lot of good pieces. I think just the big thing, Kyle, outside of the Kellys, the Glaskers, the Keanu Tanavasas, is guys taking on bigger spotlight roles. That's going to be the challenge for a lot of these defensive players. But you look at the body types, you look at the measurables. These are some legit looking bodies on the defense. And it's just now becoming those week after week guys that you can count on. That's going to be a challenge for a lot of this defense, but they've got a lot of talent to make that happen.
Yeah, it seems like the defense is setting itself up or has been set up to almost kind of support this quarterback, situation as well, where if Bear's coming in as a freshman, they're going to be able to ride some games out on the defense's back and let Bear kind of have some runway to be able to ascend maybe to the starting quarterback position throughout the season, especially the non-conference, right? I mean, the non-conference, if you just look at the schedule, it kind of sets itself up in a way that, there's a ramp up period, I guess, before you hit conference play. But I kind of wanted to look at the schedule real quick with you. If you had to look at things, Mitch, you've got obviously homecoming, you've got the Utah game. But if you, aside from that game, because it would be the game that you would circle, is there a game that you're like, that's the game I'm most interested in? That's the game other than maybe Utah that could potentially, be the hinge, the swing the season game that you're going to circle right now?
Colorado in week 5 to end September, because Colorado has shown under Coach Prime, they get off to early, strong starts both seasons. I know year 1 was was a mess for Colorado. It at least ended up 4-8, but last year they were really good. BYU blew the doors off those guys. I know that Colorado's got a huge overhaul with the portal, and Coach Prime's candid about that. And like, he loves the portal, and I respect what he's doing at Colorado. I think he's doing a great job, and I think he's kind of being underappreciated at times with how good I think he's building up Colorado from what he inherited. But I think that spot's just going to be really interesting, because I do think BYU is going to be a 3-0 football team going into that game. So you're talking about a national ranking, and you're going into then a game where it matters for the conference standings. And I just think that's going to be a real tone setter going on the road. You should win that game. You're going to probably be looked upon to win that game. You'll probably be a favorite, depending on how Colorado plays out with, they got a week 1 game on a Thursday night against Georgia Tech. So we'll learn some things about the Buffs and their quarterback situation in particular too. But I just think that's a big game for BYU, because if you win that one, then you come back home to West Virginia on a Friday night, and West Virginia is kind of almost I don't know what to reasonably expect with him. I have a lot of confidence in Rich Rod that he's going to do a nice job with them, but 50 new transfers, which I think is kind of a positive for a year 1 coach, where you're getting your guys that fit your system. But then you got like 20 new, maybe freshmen too. So you're talking about 70 guys that are making up that roster for West Virginia. I don't know what to honestly expect from them. They could be really good. They could be an absolute train wreck. But it's still 10:30 p.m. body clock game for them. So I think they're going to win that, BYU. I think they win at Arizona. I mean, you could really be talking about maybe undefeated going into that Utah game. It sounds crazy with this talk about a quarterback situation, all that, but it really sets up for BYU to get on a run.
Hey, and it was crazy last year too, right?
Yes, and it was. And I just think that Colorado game is like the key game to really get things rolling and get BYU that breakthrough. Because, I mean, that's going to be a sellout crowd. The Coach Prime effect in Boulder, it's real. I mean, the atmosphere is incredible out there. It's going to be a late night game. That's going to be a tough contest. And I think Colorado's going to be bigger, too, in the trenches. Last year, they were completely undersized compared to the size that BYU had in the trenches. They've added some bigger bodies in the trenches. So I expect Colorado to be a more physical football team than they were a season ago. So that, to me, is the one I'm really intrigued by. And I just love the Coach Prime, Coach Kalani dynamic. I hope Coach Prime stays healthy, doesn't have any more surgeries, because I think he is great for the Big 12 Conference. And I love that he's still at Colorado. I just think that's going to be an awesome matchup in Week 5 and in game number 4 for BYU.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a good way. Obviously, like ending the season last year with them, there's also a little bit of that too. And Kalani and Coach Prime, it seems like they have a pretty good relationship as well. So there's just a lot of fun elements to that matchup. Mitch, last thing before I set you loose, does this? I know you're going to come out with probably like a season, prediction or something. So I'm not going to ask you to do that. Yeah, I'm not going to have you spoil your own content. But just generally speaking, is this a team that we look at in a few months from now, end of November, a team that, just met its floor, reached its ceiling, was middle of the road? Where do you kind of expect this season to kind of play out as far as just a general sense?
I think BYU should be in the territory for 8 wins. History's shown at BYU football, when you play a true freshman, if in fact they do go forward with Bear Bachmeier, it could be anywhere from 4 to about 8 wins. The exception being 2015 was Tanner Mangum. They go 9-4, and that was a good football team. And Tanner Mangum, even that year, people forget he had like a spring football before he went on the mission. I think it was 2013. Then he goes on the mission. And so he had a little bit of experience with Bronco and the staff. I mean, this would be unprecedented going with Bear Bachmeier week 1. And, the only thing that's maybe a similar comp is 2010, and that was a 7-6 football team on the heels of a golden era for BYU football, where they felt like they were consistently a top 25 team. So history kind of says you're probably expecting middle of the road if it's a true freshman quarterback. But I believe that BYU's got more talent than those years of the past. It's hard to almost compare BYU football then to now, because power conference football is a game changer. And I think what's been underrated with this team and the national narrative around BYU is that they did bring back a lot more talent and retention than people give them credit for. We talked about LJ Martin, Isaiah Glasker and Jack Kelly are huge. And then the safeties, BYU's got a lot of talent returning paired up with some of these transfers that I think are going to be really good fits. So I feel like BYU can get to 8. But I think on the high end, what we were just talking about with, getting hot and maybe winning that Colorado game, they could be talking, 10 wins and having everything in front of them is the ceiling and maybe getting to Arlington and maybe getting to the college football playoff. I think the floor is probably 5, and that's a deep floor where it unravels on you at quarterback, and maybe there's injuries, and maybe that's one of those years like in 2022 where you've got 40 plus different starters because of injuries and maybe mediocre play and you got to make changes. Maybe I could see something like that. But I think that BYU is in a spot where they should get to 7 or 8, at least. I think 8 right now. But, and I think that would be a step in the right direction, Kyle, after an 11-win campaign. And I think people, if you look at it, with the program where it's heading, I think you could say 8-4 if you do get to that on a year where you lose your QB1 around Memorial Day. I think people would take that. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm kind of misreading BYU fans because I think they want to get that Big 12 title, and I understand.
Yeah.
But I just think there's got to be a little bit of patience. If you do go to the true freshman, there's going to be a game in there that on the surface right now, we look at that matchup and say, no way is BYU losing that game. But there's going to be some hidden matchup, like Zach Wilson 2018 against Northern Illinois, that just says that leaves you with a head scratch and you go, how did that happen? I just think those sort of performances are bound to happen with a true freshman. But still, I think that there's enough talent around this quarterback, whoever it ends up being, if it is Bear or McKay, I think they can get to 8 and really continue to show that they're going to be one of those contenders in the Big 12 that's going to be a tough out every single week.
We're recording this on Friday, August 15th, and earlier this afternoon, Mitch, you made a little announcement about Cougar Tracks, your podcast. Can you fill us in on, your plans for that over the next little bit and the new change?
Well, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that. Yeah, Cougar Tracks is going to be going daily on KSL Sports YouTube. So video, you'll see this mug on video a lot. And also KSL News Radio. So the legacy home of the Cougars, you'll have a daily BYU sports show once again. There's history there with BYU content or sports content in the evenings on KSL News Radio, and we're reviving that at KSL. So very excited about it. You'll still hear the morning and afternoon drive 60-second vignettes with Cougar Tracks, but also every night on News Radio, 6:30 p.m. But the YouTube will air live at high noon Mountain Time. And then if you miss any of those platforms, you can just get the on-demand podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. So appreciate the plug, and Cougar Tracks will keep me very busy this BYU football season.
Well, I'm sure BYU fans like me, we're going to enjoy as much as we can get. So having more Cougar Tracks to listen to. First thing I do, I open my podcast player when I get in the car to see if there's a new episode. I'm like, now I'm going to have a daily one to listen to, which is fun. So I'm excited for that for you, Mitch. I'm excited for the plans and the new things that you're going to have to wrinkle out this season for BYU fans as well. They can follow you on all of your social media channels at Mitch_Harper. Be sure to subscribe to Cougar Tracks. Listen to him on Saturdays on Cougar Sports Saturday, and then also find all of his stuff at KSLSports.com. Appreciate the time, Mitch, and we'll try and catch up this season.
You bet, Kyle, and congrats on the Royal Cougars. I know it's going to be a successful endeavor, and I know Cougar Nation's going to embrace your content. So appreciate our friendship and looking forward to the coverage that you'll be providing as well on BYU. So wish you nothing but the best going forward with Royal Cougars.
Thanks, Mitch. I appreciate it.